U.S. stocks fell today as the Federal Reserve Chairman gave a stark warning to the nation and the world about the impact of President Trump's tariffs on the economy and inflation and higher prices for consumers. Let's bring in CNN's Phil Mattingly. Phil, what exactly did Chairman Powell have to say?
I want to put this in three parts because I think it's helpful contextually. The past, the now, and the going forward. In the past, the Chairman made very clear the U.S. economy right now is in a solid position, and that backs up everything we've seen in economic data over the course of the last several months on inflation, on unemployment, on growth. It's in a solid place. So the Fed doesn't feel any need right now to move, in large part because the now. What Powell was saying about the level of uncertainty out there, not just for business leaders trying to figure out investments or which way to take their companies, but for the Fed, for the policy officials about what to do next. He said, historically unique developments with great uncertainty. This is the guy who's going to be critical if things go bad, and they have no idea and nothing to kind of tether it to as they think through their next steps. And then he said this.
Unemployment is likely to go up as the economy slows in all likelihood, and inflation is likely to go up as tariffs find their way, and some part of those tariffs come to be paid by the public.
Now, that obviously runs counter to what President Trump and his economic team have said. Powell went on to say he believes it's going to stay that way for the balance of the year. So he expects this to be sustained over time. And the problem becomes if that starts to spiral on some level, right, where inflation is going up, growth and unemployment are sluggish or problematic, that runs directly into the dual mandate of the Fed. They're going to have to make a choice, and it's a very difficult one, which side to help.
And usually it's one goes up but not the other.
Yep.
This would be a double-barreled shotgun.
If inflation is high, you raise rates, you cool things down. If unemployment or growth is problematic,
but to have high unemployment and high inflation,
it is at the worst case stagflation.
It's a double whammy. Looking at the broader picture here, the Trump administration is taking on a lot, and they're facing a lot of heat all over the place. The economy, pressure from the courts on the deportation efforts. Now, obviously, it is the Trump administration's want, indeed the want of every politician, to act as if they're confident everything's going great. Are they feeling that way behind the scenes?
They believe right now that what they have seen in the early stages of what countries are willing to put on the table is exactly the type of response that they would have wanted. The caveat to that is the rollout was not what the top economic officials would have thought or planned. The process going forward is so heavily contingent on making progress on bilateral deals that traditionally take years that the stakes are really high, and this is a high-wire act without a net. And they're also seeing things that I think underscore the market volatility right now. You know, retail sales numbers were at their highest level in 2 years. People are stocking up, right? They're trying to get in front of this. They're trying to front-run inflation and prices that they know is going to go up. And then you have NVIDIA, the chip maker, taking a $5.5 billion charge today because of export controls that they thought their chips were created to cut underneath, meaning they believe, and this is showing, they are dead serious about the China element of this trade war, and it's probably going to be for a long time.
With us now is Douglas Holtz-Eakin. He served as chief economist on the President's Council of Economic Advisors under President George W. Bush. He's now the president of the American Action Forum. Doug, thank you so much for being with us, as always. So you heard there from Jerome Powell, higher inflation, slower growth. Consumers are going to pick up the tab on a large part of these increased tariffs. What do you imagine is going to happen here if this scenario goes on without newly negotiated deals?
Well, if things stay as they are now, I think what you'll see is a series of reports for the remainder of the data on March that'll be surprisingly strong. And everyone will think, oh, gee, maybe they didn't get this right, because people went out and bought things in anticipation of tariffs. A lot of businesses built their inventories in anticipation of these tariffs. And then I think once you get to the second quarter and start seeing the data, it's going to drop off sharply. And that's going to be exactly what the chairman was worried about, a real decline in the growth of employment, perhaps even a drop in employment, an increase in the rate of inflation. And the other part of his remarks are really devoted to his concern that inflation be a temporary and one-time phenomenon and not be allowed to become an enduring phenomenon, as we saw over the years since 2021. So it was, I think, a very, very clear warning to the American people and to the administration about the consequences of what's going on right now.
Notably, President Trump says he's attending a meeting at the White House today with Japanese officials to negotiate tariffs What are you looking for to come out of that meeting?
You would hope that we can find a way for the tariffs to be reduced, but remember, the negotiations are in principle focused on the so-called reciprocal tariffs, which got paused for 90 days. We still have in place a 10% universal tariff, an unprecedentedly large tariff for the United States. We have the steel, aluminum, and auto tariffs. He's promising pharmaceuticals and silicon chips and copper and lumber, and those tariffs by themselves are comparable to the tariffs known as the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in the Great Depression. So the things they're negotiating about leave in place an enormous tax increase on the American people and a real headwind to the capacity for this economy to continue to grow.
Do you see the news that Japanese car maker Honda is going to shift some production to the U.S., partly due to tariffs, as a win, as a positive development?
I don't see it as a win at all. You know, they're going to shift it because they want to try to maintain their part of the market share. But for the economy as a whole, the tariffs are what they are. And the American consumer is going to pay them. We're going to have the higher prices and slower growth.
We do have breaking news this morning. I got to say, it's breaking news that made the market sit up straight. President Trump, just a short time ago, declared on social media that the termination of Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, quote, cannot come fast enough. So these are the strongest words the president has said out loud or written out loud, floating the idea of dismissing the Fed chair, a move that's legally questionable. Not clear he could fire him if he wanted to. The timing also crucial. It comes just after Powell very publicly warned that the Fed would be in a tough spot as the president's tariffs raise prices and weaken the economy. He says prices likely will go up. It will likely slow down economic growth, and consumers do bear the costs of these tariffs. Let's get right to CNN's Elena Treen at the White House for this much more public front and assault on Jerome Powell. Elena.
That's right. This is really, I think, a breaking point of their relationship, or really hitting a fever pitch, I should say, with what the president is saying this morning. Just to read a little bit of what he wrote. He wrote, quote, Jerome Powell of the Fed, who is always too late and wrong, he said that in all caps, yesterday issued a report which was another and typical complete mess. He went on to say that Powell's termination could not come fast enough. Now, as you mentioned, John, this comes just a day after Jerome Powell spoke in Chicago yesterday and gave his starkest warning yet of the potential economic fallout of President Donald Trump's tariff policies. He said essentially that he believed tariffs would create a, quote, challenging scenario for the central bank, and really putting some of their two main goals, which is, of course, having stable inflation and also a healthy labor market, at odds. Now, just to give you a step back and give you a little more insight into the relationship between the president and Jerome Powell, it's one that has always been tense and fraught going back years now. And the president has repeatedly, and not just in this term, but also in his first term, urged the Fed to cut rates. But we're seeing that even more so now, of course, because of the economic concerns regarding some of the president's trade policies and tariff policies. Now, one thing that is clear is that the Fed is supposed to operate independently of politics, something Powell reiterated yesterday. But we also know that the president has tried to issue an executive order to take more control over the central bank. And there's also concerns that perhaps the president could move to try and oust Jerome Powell before his term is up in May of 2026. All to say, we are seeing this fight really play out more publicly. I would anticipate this isn't the end of what we'll be hearing from the president regarding how Powell is running the Fed.
Yeah, it does not seem the president liked what Jerome Powell had to say yesterday. The president of the United States went directly after Fed Chair Jerome Powell, saying his termination cannot come fast enough. My question to you, our question to you this morning, is a simple legal one, although I'm not sure there's a simple legal answer.
Is there ever?
Can the president terminate the Fed chair?
Well, the simple legal answer, John, is we don't know for sure. If you look at the state of law as it exists at this moment here, as we sit in April 2025, the answer is no. And that's because of a U.S. Supreme Court case, goes back to 1935, called Humphrey's Executor, which says in these multi-member agencies, these independent agencies like the FTC, the SEC, and here the Fed, the president can only remove those members for cause, meaning if the person has done a horrible job, has been absent, that kind of thing. And so that would protect the Fed chair. However, there has been a growing movement by this administration and by prior administrations to challenge that law and to say that essentially, no, it's up to the president if he wants to fire these people, and there's no limitations on why he could fire them. And John, really important to note, if the president does fire Chairman Powell, there will be a lawsuit. Obviously, the stakes will be very high, but that may not be the case that decides this, because there's another case involving the firing of other board members of other boards of the FTC and the National Merit Protection Board that's already up at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has not decided yet whether they'll take it, but that one's way ahead of this potential case in terms of the procedure here. But the stakes here are huge. I think it's only a matter of time before one of these cases reaches the Supreme Court, and that'll tell us exactly how much power the president has to fire the Fed chair and other independent appointees within the executive branch.
I mean, I feel like we have to use Boasberg's words against you when it comes to saying that it hasn't been legally tested. I'm going to say none of their responses has been satisfactory. That is not a satisfactory response, Ellie. We need it to be cut and dry. Yes or no?
I wish I could give you a yes or no, Kate. It would be irresponsible for me. What I will say is, right now, the answer is no, we can't fire him, but that could change. How about that?
Yeah, it only add one complication is there are people who think that even if the Supreme Court steps in and rules on the FTC thing.
Was this the thing you were talking about, the definition of an agency?
They may try to have a carve out for the Fed. I mean, it's even uncertain on top of its uncertainty here, Ellie. But it really makes it interesting when the president goes after the Fed chair so publicly. Ellie Hoden, counselor, thank you very much for explaining so much. Let's get right to CNN early start anchor and business correspondent Rahel Solomon. The U.S. was already in a trade war. Now the president's kind of in a Fed war also.
Folks, top officials in the government, people that have, if not in cabinet, at least they have cabinet-style processes to get in there where they have to be appointed by a president. The Fed is somewhat semi-separate, but what Trump wants to do is effectively treat the semi-separate organizations as cabinet-type appointments. So I have no issue saying that this is what Trump envisions as his cabinet turning on him. Because again, Trump sees, unlike past presidents who, for example, see the Secretary of Education as their cabinet, but the FBI, the CIA, the Fed, all of that, they don't see those as cabinet people, but they are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate and all of that. And you can see that they're giving up on Trump's ideology, right? The fact of the matter is they're saying his approach will increase unemployment and also increase inflation, which is a stagflationary thing where you see lower growth but also not a drop in inflation, which is really the worst of both worlds. And it's all entirely Donald Trump's doing. Look, Biden, not perfect, of course, much better than this monster, but fundamentally it was moving in the right direction. Employment was remaining steady and going down a little bit. Inflation was on its way down. Wages were up, all of that, right? The fact of the matter is Trump, with his tariff nonsense, destroyed all of that in a matter of weeks. And that's where we are right now. Donald Trump needs to realize that people are turning on him because he makes no sense even compared to Trump of 5-6 years ago.